One consequence of your theories is that we are, as human beings, very, very rigidly pre-programmed. There are certain things we can understand, certain things we can communicate, and anything that falls outside that, we simply can't. Is that so?
That's certainly correct.
So, I mean, in a way, this is a rather alarming doctrine. I mean, it certainly contravenes the way we want to feel about ourselves.
Well, that may be an immediate reaction, but I think it's not the correct reaction. In fact, while it's true that our genetic program rigidly constrains us, I think the more important point is that the existence of that rigid constraint is what provides the basis for our freedom and creativity. And the reason...
What you mean, it's only because we're pre-programmed that we can do all the things we can do.
Exactly. The point is that if we really were plastic organisms without an extensive pre-programming, then the state that our mind achieves would in fact be a reflection of the environment, which means it would be extraordinarily impoverished. Fortunately for us, we're rigidly pre-programmed with extremely rich systems that are part of our biological endowment. Correspondingly, a small amount of rather degenerate experience allows a kind of a great leap into a rich cognitive system, essentially uniform in a community, and in fact roughly uniform for the species.
Which would have developed over countless evolutionary ages through the biological
system,
evolutionary process.
Right. The basic system itself developed over long periods of evolutionary development. We don't know how, really. But for the individual, it's present. As a result, the individual is capable of, with a very small amount of evidence, of constructing an extremely rich system, which allows him to act in the free and creative fashion, which in fact is normal for humans. We can say anything that we want over an infinite range. Other people will understand us, though they've heard nothing like that before. We're able to do that precisely because of that rigid programming. But short of that, we would not be able to at all.
What account are you able to give of creativity? If we are pre-programmed in the way you say, then how is creativity a possibility for us?
Well, here I think one has to be fairly careful. I think we can say a good deal about the nature of the system that is acquired, the state of knowledge that is attained. We can say a fair amount about the biological, the basis in the initial state of the mind for the acquisition of this system. But when we turn to a third question, namely, how is this system used? How are we able to act creatively? How can we decide to say things that are new but not random, that are appropriate to occasions but not under the control of stimuli? When we ask these questions, we really enter into a realm of mystery where human science, at least so far, and maybe in principle, does not reach. We can say a fair amount about the principles that make it possible for us to behave in our normal creative fashion, but as soon as questions of will or decision or reason or choice of action, when those questions arise, human science is at a loss. It has nothing to say about them as far as I can see. These questions remain in the obscurity in which they were in classical antiquity.
We're all very used, I think, to the idea that in social life, each one of us as individuals tends to construct a picture of the world around his own experience. And indeed, it's difficult to see how we could do anything else. We're bound to do that. We've got no alternative. But it does mean that each one of us forms a systematically distorted view of the world because it's all built up on what accidentally happens to be the particular and really rather narrow experience of the individual who does it. Now, do you think that something of that kind applies to man as a whole because of the reasons implicit in your theory? That is to say, that the whole picture that mankind has formed of the cosmos, of the universe, of the world, must be systematically distorted and what's more drastically limited by the nature of the particular apparatus for understanding that he happens to have?
Well, I think that is undoubtedly the case, but again I would question the use of the word limited, which carries unfortunate suggestions. That is, I assume that one of our faculties, one of our mental organs, if you like, is, let's call it a science-forming capacity, a capacity to create intelligible explanatory theories in some domain. And if we look at the history of science, we discover that time after time, when particular questions were posed at a particular level of understanding, it was possible to make very innovative leaps of the imagination to rich explanatory theories that presented an intelligible picture of that subdomain of the universe, often wrong theories, as we later discovered, but there's a course that's followed. And this could have been the case only because we do have, and we in fact share across the species, a kind of a science-forming capacity that is that limits us, as you say, but by the same token, provides the possibility of creating explanatory theories that extend so vastly far beyond any evidence that's available. I mean, it's very important to realize that, it should be obvious to say, but it's worth saying that when a new theory is created, and I don't necessarily mean Newton, I mean even a small theory, what the scientist is typically doing, first of all, he has very limited evidence. The theory goes far, far beyond the evidence. Secondly, much of the evidence that's available is typically disregarded. That is, it's put to the side in the hope that somebody else will take care of it someday and we can forget about it. So at every stage in the history of science, there's even normal science, not Kuhnian revolutions, there's a high degree of idealization that goes on. So there's selection of evidence, distortion of evidence, creation of new theory, confirmation or refutation or modification of that theory, further idealization. These are all very curious steps. And we're capable of, and nevertheless, we can often make them, and make them in a way which is intelligible to others. It doesn't look like some random act of the imagination. And where that's possible, we can develop intelligible theories. We can gain some comprehension of the nature of this aspect of the world. Now, this is possible only because we are rigidly pre-programmed again, because we have somehow developed through evolution or however the specific faculty of forming very particular theories. Of course, it follows at once, or at least it's reasonable to assume that this very faculty, which enables us to construct extremely rich and successful theories in some domain, may lead us very far astray in some other domain. For example, there may be some, again, a Martian scientist looking at us and observing our successes and errors from a higher intelligence, let's say, might be bemused to discover that whereas in some domains we seem to be able to make scientific progress, in other domains we always seem to be running up against a blank wall because our minds are so constructed that we just can't make the intellectual leap that's required. We can't formulate the concepts. We don't have the categories that are required to gain insight into that domain.